Welcome to Canada's podcast, the number one podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs.
Hi, this is Angela Fay from Canada's podcast. Welcome to November and to Joel Sherlock from Vitalis Extraction. We're super excited to have Joel with us today. He is a serial entrepreneur and investor focused on finance, real estate, tech, and emerging markets. So we're going to touch on a little bit of all that. Joel, welcome to Canada's podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Well, and before I actually get into your entrepreneurial, just tell me what that is behind you. Just give me a little.
So one of the companies I started is a manufacturing business called Vitalis, and we make a botanical extractor. So I'm sure we'll touch on this, but with some of the changes in normal business, we usually do a lot of trade shows, and so one of the trade shows, which was the biggest one of the year, is usually in Las Vegas. That, of course, is not happening, so it's online. So our staff, this is one of the extraction platforms we manufacture, and we have a bit of a video hub, if you will. So I stole it for this podcast because it's a cool background.
Okay, awesome. And that is just no small botanical extraction machine back there, let me tell you.
It isn't. Maybe before it's over, I'll run over and stand next to it because I think scale is lost here. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Or maybe, should I do that now?
Yeah, let's do that now, just for fun. Okay, wow. Okay, so it's bigger than you.
Yeah, and that's, we make industrial scale equipment. So there's big, and then there's bigger than that one as well.
Well, and I am going to touch on that a little bit, but tell me a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey.
I can't really stay still, right? Yeah, Vitalis was my 16th startup when we started. I mean, I started in, background in finance, was going to be a stockbroker and was doing my Canadian securities, and, first year of college, moved out, bought a house with a friend, and, we couldn't afford much. So, we bought this tiny little apartment and did some renos to it. And then he met a girl, and I had to sell it. And that was kind of how I was forced into my first fix and flip. So got pretty active in the real estate side, which was great. Put a private equity fund together to buy up some of that cheap Arizona real estate during one of those downturns.
Right.
Started to reinvest a lot of that into commercial property in Canada. And then, stumbled into the legal cannabis market when I became the tenant to one of the early licensed growers in the Health Canada framework. And then, invested in a fertilizer business and a lighting company, and then started financing some of these machines back there. And then we really went out to standardize to one platform and couldn't get the customization we were looking for. So had a good friend who was an engineer and still is, but said, "Hey, could you build me a couple of these?" And the rest is history, as they say.
Can you give me an idea of just your timeline, Joel? When was the start of Vitalis?
I mean, he and I started talking about it 7 years ago. We really started moving on the company 6 years ago. Vitalis' incorporation date, I believe, is probably 5.5 years old now. But we are the largest manufacturer in the world for this type of equipment for the cannabis and hemp space. Now, it works in a lot of other industries, but that's really where we dominated. So, we've got offices on 4 continents, and service staff, because selling equipment like that is one piece of the puzzle, and then servicing it is another.
Well, and when when we were talking, I was looking at your website. The image of your whole team, right, is there and super dominant. Can you give me some insight on how you get from in 5.5 years to having, over 100 staff? Is that right? Did I get the number right?
Yeah, we were up to like 120 at the peak.
So you have that many staff in actual manufacturing in BC here, and you have 4 offices in 4 continents in 5.5 years. Just give me some insight on that scale. I mean, that's pretty rapid growth, really.
Well, wasn't without many lessons, and I think ultimately, I have 2 partners in the business, and we are 3 very distinct specialties, right? And James is the engineer and really the brains behind all of our designs. Before COVID, I was a lot of travel, business development, exploring new markets and kind of paving the way as to when we were coming in. And then, our third partner was more on the operational side. So that really helped. I think the diverse experience that we brought forward also really helped. For me, I love being the stupidest person at the table. It means we've got a good table together. So, my business mentor relationships and
I don't know.
well, I'm very, very comfortable asking for help and listening and really, there was a lot when we were scaling this business that we didn't know. I mean, frankly, there still is. I mean, as we expand into food and flavorings and pharma and other industries, there's still lots to learn. And I guess I'm a forever student and kind of addicted to that process.
Awesome. And there's a benefit in a three-legged stool, with your operations, your engineering, and your biz dev. I think that's a magic formula.
For sure.
So, and the what continents are you on? Just out of curiosity.
So, I mean, manufacturing for us is all in British Columbia. Okay. So that's actually where I'm sitting right now. I'm in one of our locations here. So in Kelowna is where we make all of this equipment, and that's been phenomenal. It's for those who haven't been, I mean, it's a great four-season, it's wine country, which I love. We've got the lake in the summertime. You've got great skiing and snowboarding in the wintertime. So it kind of touches all boxes. It's been a great tool for us recruiting people. There's a lot of people who want to come and live here, especially if you're a top engineer in the oil and gas sector, right. Then you were usually Northern Alberta. So the idea of being able to get from Northern Alberta into Kelowna has worked very well for us. Yeah. So that was great. We have offices East and West Coast in the US. We have an office in Latin America and Colombia. And then our main hub for Europe is in Rotterdam. So our equipment's big, goes usually across on boats. We've flown a couple, but if you need it there quickly, you can put it in an airplane.
In pieces.
But most of our stuff goes into our warehouse in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And then, we have a center in Australia as well, which looks after Oz and New Zealand.
Oh, wow. Is there anything that is common between those countries in the cannabis sector?
Yeah, I mean, the lessons, the process of sort of those evolving markets, right? Traditionally, patients take a little while to get going. Extraction facilities traditionally take a lot more time to build than you'd expect. Ultimately in the cannabis space, a lot of the professionals are coming from like pharma or some other industry. So there's a learning process. It's a very, very steep learning curve anytime you're kind of creating the market. The other consistent is change, right? I mean, that's kind of the only guarantee is,
right.
Especially when you look at the cannabis or hemp markets and how quickly they've moved, right? The only guarantee is that they won't be the same in a year from now, or as we joke, it moves in dog years. So in 7 years from now.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Canada's position in botanical market. How would you define it?
I mean, it's been, it's been a great moment for Canadians, right? I mean, we've really led this on a global scale. There's a lot of people watching us. We have made a ton of mistakes, but we were first, right? And it's certainly paved a way. This is, be it public markets and companies like Canopy or Aurora or Afria, they've made their mistakes as well. But, we're leading it from a public market banking side. We're leading it from a kind of industry side. I mean, the dominant players are all Canadian companies right now. If they can get their feet under them and really execute well, then I think it's our market to continue to dominate. And from a market of this size and with the potential that's here, it's a great moment to be Canadian. I mean, I'm very proud that way, but it's been a lot of fun being able to build this from BC.
Well, and it's interesting for me because I had a co-working space and had some events, hosted some events, which was really just creating a safe place for people to talk just prior to legalization. And so I'm new to the awareness of the sector, but just how professional it is and how, how big it is. It is, much bigger than I ever anticipated, and much more public now that we're legalized here in Canada. The big question that was difficult to answer a couple of years ago, and I'm curious what your perspective is the culture of uptake, if you like, or the perceived culture in botanicals and natural medicines and things like that. Where do you think we sit now?
I mean, it's been, where do we sit as Canada, or where does the industry sit?
Both.
So again, Canada's led, and now I think, what's been very, very interesting is as Canada and the Canadian LPs have been looking to go elsewhere, right? In moving into Europe, where it's a purely pharma market, they've had to bring in EU GMP experts. So like more pharmaceutical experience and expertise. Companies like Novo Nordisk in Denmark, or experts from, the Johnson and Johnsons, the large GSKs, like big pharma companies. So the level of documentation and sophistication to make sure that you have an output that doesn't change. When you get into medicinal markets, that's essential.
Right.
So that's been really interesting. But one of the fascinating parts, because a lot of those pharma people coming over have not dealt with cannabis before. So there's kind of the teams that have done it very successfully have merged those two expertises together, right? The people who may have come out of, California's a recreational market, and a lot of people say, oh, we're so different than that. But what's been learned there, and how they're separating off terpenes, or how they're getting broad spectrum, or how they're removing THC out of CBD so that it could be shipped across borders. There's so many lessons to be learned, and when those teams can really, really work well together, I think that makes a successful business.
And so, do you think we've kind of overcome collectively the negative perception? No. So what are the roadblocks that we have to get over?
Not even close. The conversation in Canada is totally different than it has been. I mean, if I think back to when we made our first investment, I mean, I became the tenant to that cannabis company. I mean, calling Royal Bank and saying, these guys have a legal marijuana cultivation operation. Like, are you going to call my mortgage if I take them in? And that was unheard of at the time. And ultimately, in full transparency, I did usher them out of my office after they said, hey, we have a license. And I laughed and said, yeah, sure. But looked into it and invited them back, and admitted that I was wrong. But it's evolved very quickly, but we're still not there yet. I mean, we've opened the doors for natural medicines. I think, anecdotally, the patients are driving, and the results that some patients have seen getting off opioids, or managing pain in a different way, or whatever it may be, Dravet syndrome and seizures and CBD, right? There's been some undeniable benefits, which is getting some of the physicians to open their minds a little bit to this type of medicine, which has been great. And I think that's going to continue. I mean, we're starting to see it now in the psychedelics industry, clinical trials with psilocybin, or clinical trials with MDMA. So there's still lots of work to be done, and we are still, in the first or second inning of really what can be done globally here. And I think as soon as we get out of Canada and you go to, Europe or United Kingdom or somewhere, there's still, it's very early there.
So how, from your perspective, one of the dangers of being in an emerging market is, and I think I'm kind of bouncing back your own words, is coming out too hard, too fast, or hard and fast, and being able to maintain that momentum. Yep. What are your insights, Joel, on making sure, or not making sure, that's the wrong words, maybe helping keep Canada at the forefront? How do we maintain our position as a leader in this emerging market?
I mean, I think we need to, not be too apologetic, like we made some mistakes, but at least the Canadian federal legalization framework is together. It's not perfect, but it's together. If you look at the lack of federally legal cannabis in the US makes, you know, you have like the 50 countries of cannabis essentially, right? Like Oregon operates completely different from Washington, completely different from California. You know, our banking side and taking companies public, some have done exceptionally well and really moved the industry forward, and some have sort of spiked, and maybe there were some bad actors involved. But again, I think we need to take the lessons and learn and move on as we go into other markets. But ultimately, learning from those mistakes and not repeating them is very important. But also being thoughtful about, like, it took some time for our physicians to get on side the patients, you know, some of the groups who may be against it. I mean, that's going to happen again as you roll out into any new market, right? The UK and the NHS, you saw very similar back and forth. I mean, Italy and what they've just done with CBD, it's still very much in flux. I mean, they're essentially going through what we went through 3 or 4 years ago, depending on who you ask.
Right. And what if we could kind of wave a magic wand and have an ecosystem, if you like, in Canada, what are some of the gaps that are missing that you'd love to see filled?
Oh, it's a great question. Some of the gaps, I mean, again, I think I'd love to see, when it comes to cannabis, I'd love to see those groups work very well together, right? You know, the people who have that legacy cannabis knowledge, and then the, you know, the pharma, the documentation, the consistency, right? To kind of keep elevating that level of outputs, right? I mean, anytime you look at a medicinal product or a recreational product with recalls, you know, that's that doesn't do much for trust, right? Even the regulators, you know, learning and talking to each other, right? Learn from when other countries are putting their regulations together, you know, learn from what did Canada do well, what did Canada do poorly.
Right.
Yeah, and hopefully we can sort of pave the way.
Let's just add the layer of the current economic climate into the conversation. Not so much the last 10 months, because, you know, the worst investment we all made was a 2020 plan, or this year. Let's talk about like the next sort of, you know, 12, 24, however many years that a little recovery will take for you guys. And what, where would you like to see some momentum happen from your perspective?
I guess, you know, if we talk about some of our assets like Vitalis, for instance, right? I mean, we have had to adapt and adjust. We can ship equipment, but, you know, shipping technicians to go and train and install, you know, from Canada to globally, wherever we serviced, I mean, that's become far more problematic. You send somebody for 1 week and then they have to quarantine for 2 on the way home. So, you know, we've been training different teams. We've been doing a lot more things virtually. I think some of that's been fantastic, right? I mean, a lot of the travel that I did in the last couple of years, maybe I didn't need to, right? So it's been an eye opener that way. You know, to go from 250 days to 0, I definitely missed some of it, but I don't know if I need to go back to the crazy pace that I was, for sure. So, you know, there's been some learnings there. We've actually had the time to reinvest in a lot of R&D, which has been fantastic. There were sort of projects and innovations that we really wanted to move forward on the pre and post processing. So, you know, like we see the bottlenecks, and you know, we really want to be able to help our clients streamline their processes. You know, so we've been able to invest a lot of time and effort and resources into innovating some technology after the extraction step. So that's been fantastic. What else would I love to see waving a magic wand? I'll keep pondering on that one.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I'm going to ask a little bit about your ideal client.
Yeah.
What can you describe them? What sort of volume?
I mean,
is it a grower or a producer, or who? Sorry,
yeah, I mean, you know, our clients here are definitely on the processing side. So they'd be, you know, some are growing and processing. They'd be vertically integrated. Others are just buying biomass, processing it, and then, you know, selling a final product, right? I guess going back to your wave a magic wand question, one of our ideal clients is really truly somebody who understands the business they're getting into, or understands what they don't know, right? So that we can properly educate them through it. Because deciding on a piece of capital equipment like that, you really need to know how much are you going to be putting in, and what kind of products are you going to be looking to make in your lab, right? Both now and in the future. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you where's the tipping point for, and I'll describe it as a client or a buyer, to be vertically integrated. Where's that cost point, right? Where maybe you should consider being both.
So interestingly, some states require it, right? Like Florida, for instance, you have to be vertically integrated all the way through. But if we remove ourselves from cannabis for a second, right?
Okay.
A lot of groups would become vertically integrated once they've mastered one step. If you look at, McDonald's growing their potatoes and, all the way down to owning the beef farms, there's pros and cons to it, right? And they may not have started like that, but they've sort of gained buying power or bought businesses because it made sense, right? So ultimately, if you try and tackle everything, you're increasing your risk. And if you have experts in growing and an understanding of what it's going to take, you have experts in extraction and an understanding of what it's going to take, and you're a consumer products goods expert and you know what that's going to take, then maybe it's a good idea. If you have to, for just the way the laws in your state or country, province, wherever you are, then you may be forced into it. But ultimately, it's probably best to start one, master it, and then look at the others.
Is there any, and forgive me if I'm asking a question if you have client privilege, but are there any examples that you can think of where they've mastered the growing, even if it's a collective, mastered the growing, mastered the extraction, and mastered that consumer good, where you can go, yeah, boom, this is a great example.
So, yeah, I mean, we're still so early in these markets that, if you look at, like, when Alan Gertner used to say this all the time, when you look at the coffee market, when it came out, like, good coffee was strong coffee. And I think we're at that phase right now. So there are some people who love, these niche products, or like, ice water hash, or in the cannabis industry, there's all these sort of subsets of dabs and pre-rolls and vape cartridges that so many of us had heard about, but there's so many different levels of quality within there. There are some people who are shopping on price. There are some people who are, shopping on purely just terpene profile, so it's still so varied. And I think that's important to think about when, like, the consumer hasn't finished evolving, right? Those trends are still very, very fast to move. So when you're putting your infrastructure together, you really have to be thoughtful about, how wide are the operating parameters of my lab, because the consumer preferences are varying at such a wild rate.
Do you have any young people in your life that you influence, kids or nieces or nephews or anything like that?
You know what? I still have a lot of family in Winnipeg. I'm from Winnipeg originally, but moved, great place to be from.
Yep. So
so still have lots of nieces, nephews there. And lots of kids running around on the Vitalis front here. None of my own. I was also
the reason for my question, and so I'm going to just kind of dig in from a personal perspective, is I am a new consumer, right? As far as dabbled a couple of years ago when I started these events, and a girlfriend said to me, and you can't host an event if you've never tested. So I walked into a dispensary for the first time a couple of years ago and went, okay, so I'm in the age where I grew up and cannabis was illegal, right? So it never entered my mindset as a viable consumer experience.
Yeah.
Now, my kids and my friends' kids are growing up where cannabis is legal. So there's probably going to be a store on one corner that says liquor store, and then there's going to be a store on this corner that says cannabis store. And so this next generation is growing up with a totally different mindset.
For sure.
So how do you imagine this consumer evolving in a good way for that next generation? Like really, we're kind of treating the next generation of consumers.
Yeah, you know what I mean? There are some retailers, because I think a lot of that education is going to happen at the retailer level, right? I mean, cannabis was sort of taboo, and at one point alcohol was as well, right? So imagine if all of a sudden these liquor stores opened up that had all this choice, and you just walked into it. It's kind of hard for people to imagine, right? But you need somebody to talk you through what's the difference between this grape and that grape. When I'm looking at this wine, what's the difference between bourbon and vodka? But when you go to cannabis, there's so many other nuances, because a lot of people may be using it to treat an ailment or anxiety or whatever your use may be. But the retailers can't necessarily, well, in Canada, they can't make any of those claims, which is reasonable. But part of that experience is going to be retailer led, right? Is the store well organized? Is there the right staff behind the counter to answer those questions? And if you look at someone like Mimi Lam of Suprat, they have a brilliant way of, different baskets mean different things. You pick up this color, it means I'm just here to get my stuff, buy and leave. I pick up this color and it's like, hey, I could use some help. This is new.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super simple way of just kind of saying, this is how much help I need without having to.
Totally.
Right? Especially as a new emerging market. Okay, this is totally interesting. I just want to ask one question in relation to, that's a big piece of equipment. So is there, I don't want to ask like a cost dollar, but is there financing available? How does somebody decide to be a lab? And
you go back to your question about waving the magic wand, right? I mean, traditionally, if you're building a brewery, or if you're buying a tractor to plant carrots, or you're traditionally farming or corn or anything, you usually have finance support. Still, even though we have federal legalization in Canada, a lot of the banks are still kind of at arm's length here. So, usually in capital expenses like a piece of equipment, or a bakery ovens, or a brewer's equipment, or a winery's equipment, you can get financing. It's just starting now, but it's still usually at higher rates. It's usually private investors. So we do have some financing support, but it wouldn't be like getting a mortgage at these great rates that exist now, or buying a car at 0%. That's not quite here yet, because the big banks aren't supporting the companies who are buying with leverage at reasonable rates.
So it's a catch-22, right? We're an emerging market. We want to stay ahead, but access to capital is probably a bit of a challenge or a roadblock right now.
Big time.
Yeah.
Especially now.
So tell me, talk about integrated ecosystem here. And you have a finance company as well?
So much like when we started a lot of our ventures, it's kind of been out of demand, right? So there were a lot of banks who wanted to get into the space, but didn't understand cannabis, right? I mean, as Michigan comes online, somebody says, oh, I'll lend to you, but I need 3 years of audited financials. Well, the program hasn't been around for 3 years, so that's an impossibility. So you really can't support this entrepreneur. There is a lot of startups. It is an emerging market. You kind of have to understand the risk. And the lenders, traditionally borrowers were looking at equity or debt. Right. And so it's still expensive debt, but oftentimes if you know what you're doing, that can be cheaper than equity.
So
still early days.
People can connect with you, Joel, not just for extraction equipment, but for financing in the sector?
So financing, again, really, I was one of the founders, but there's a really, really great team there. Leo, our CEO of Spectrum Leasing, Susan, our controller, and Rebecca, we're all on that team, but I can absolutely put you in touch. But
Perfect. Now, you already touched a little bit on Kelowna, but let's talk a little bit about Western Canada being a hub and a reason for doing business here in British Columbia, maybe in the sector, or just generally what's happening in the Lower Mainland and in Kelowna.
You know what I mean? Kelowna's had a lot. I mean, once you get involved in the community here, there's some really innovative manufacturing businesses here, which, to be honest, before I was in the space, I didn't know them all, right? I mean, Kelowna Flightcraft was one that lots of people talked about, but there's a lot of smaller, really, really impressive ones as well. So that's been fantastic. The technology space in Kelowna has been booming, and the city's been doing a lot of initiatives on its own marketing. So it's been really nice for talent acquisition, even from the East Coast.
Right.
There's a lot of people who want to get out this way. So there's
Well,
the
and
big move to out west.
there's a big, to me, that just reinforces a connection between, the need for a community to position itself, not just with outdoor, activities that they can do, but, the business culture and the business climate in order for the local companies to attract talent and expand is
Absolutely
kind of key. If you could brand Kelowna in a global market for total self-serving purposes, what would you brand it?
You know what? I mean, honestly, it's so funny where maybe we wouldn't, right? For total self-serving purposes, right? I mean, if Kelowna had 1 million people in it, it might not have the same charm.
Right.
I mean, the vineyards, the lake, the world-class skiing, all close. I couldn't tell you which one of those three. You'd almost have to like make a hybrid of all of them. But I think once people understood what's here, it's nice that it's kind of a small, great community. Yeah.
Well, and I think that, we have to build on the fact that we are globally renowned for BC Bud, right? As far as anywhere you travel in the world, even as a non or new consumer, the reputation precedes us with BC
True.
Bud, right?
A lot of local expertise, as they say.
Exactly. Joel, any final comments for our listeners here?
Yeah, you know what? You can find us on vitaliset.com. That's Vitalis Extraction Technology. And then you can find me on most of those social channels and reach out if you got any questions. Love to chat.
Well, and I'll add to that Joel has, as another initiative, is you've got your own podcast. Just give me a quick synopsis of the Extraction Insiders.
Yeah, again, one of those sort of innovation pieces, right? I mean, as we were saying, we used to do a lot of trade shows, and we loved the concept of family dinner, where we'd have clients and people new to the industry and get them together. And usually there was good food and good wine and good conversation. So can't do that right now. So we started the podcast, which has we're doing our best to just continue those conversations, learn from the lessons that some of our more experienced clients mistakes they've made, how to avoid that, best practices, and some of the surprises along the way. So we don't take it too seriously. It's usually a pretty casual conversation with great people.
It is, and I'll totally mimic that. That great conversations with great people, I think, is what your podcast is all about. So if you're in the business and want to have a little inside scoop on extraction and where it's going, check out Joel's or Vitalis is it Vitalis that's actually hosting it, or you personally? Yeah, Vitalis.
Yeah, Vitalis.
Awesome. Joel, thank you so much. We learned a lot about Kelowna and about the equipment that you're producing, and proud to, of course, have Vitalis here as one of the world's biggest manufacturers of botanical extraction equipment. So thanks for joining us on Canada's podcast.
Take care.